Today on the show, we interview Alicia Rodriguez. Alicia is the author of The Shaman's Wife, a deep dive into her story of surrender and self-discovery.
Yeah, we talk about being witnessed. We talk about love relationships and losing our power for this desire to be loved and to belong. Good stuff. Really good stuff.
Yeah, Alicia bares her soul, dives into her own personal story, and talks a lot about how she works with others and continues to foster this connection for everybody out there in the world. I hope you enjoy the show.
Melanie Curtis, Jason Maletsky. Big goals, deep work. Love, fear. Being human. Learning to live in alignment with our values. On the path to our full potential. Trust the journey.
Alicia Rodriguez. Yes.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to
Yes.
have you.
So good to have you. We right before we started recording, we were talking about Hatch and how we initially met at C2 and mutual friends that we have, and I always am interested to hear those types of things, like the network that connects us, the beautiful humans that bring us together, right? Like it makes sense that we would be sitting here today talking and having this conversation, but I'm like, wow, you know what I mean? C2 Montreal, that was in
A long time
2016,
ago.
right?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, what a way, like how far we have come since
right.
then. I mean, I almost want to start there. Like, what brought you to that event where we met? And give us a little context as to where you were then as it sets us up for where we're going.
Let's see,
in your story.
2016. I think it was May, wasn't it?
I believe it was, yeah.
It was
In
May.
the spring sometime, yeah.
Yeah. So in 2016, I was still living part-time in the United States. And I was between Ecuador and the United States. But I was spending more time in the United States at that point. I hadn't moved fully into my life in Ecuador. And I was running a leadership development firm, Sophia Associates, and I still run it, but not the same way.
Right.
And
right.
so I went. So that was 2016. It was United States, moving to Ecuador, and eventually moving here to Portugal, where I now live.
Portugal, that's a big jump across the ocean.
Yeah, it was. I love Portugal.
I'm curious, before we move forward, I want to go a little further back because I was reading all the notes about your book and the different interviews and stuff. And I'm curious about what's your backstory? Where does Alicia grow up? What's her life like? Who is she before she becomes the shaman's wife?
Yeah. So I was just this little Latina girl in a white world. That
Yep.
kind of really encompasses it, because back then, it was very unusual. I remember being at school. When I went to school, I went very early. I was 4 years old, and I went to a Catholic school run by Dominican nuns. My parents are from Colombia, South America. So I grew up speaking Spanish. And when I went to school, I didn't know a word of English. And I have the memory, even though I was like about 4, I have the memory of the nuns putting me in front of the class and saying the Hail Mary in Spanish. And it was like terrifying.
Where did you go to school?
Back then it was in Boston.
Okay.
It was actually Watertown, which is a suburb of Boston. And I think some of my story actually started there, because there's actually, in the book, there is that, the book goes back and forth, but one of the things that kind of initiated, I guess, the journey that I was on was this idea that I was different. And in my family, it was not unusual for us to have these kind of what I would now describe as metaphysical experiences. But as a kid, you don't know that. And I was not one of the, I looked different than everybody else. And when I finally did learn to speak English, I thought, oh, good, they'll stop picking on me. Because I was being picked on. And I told one of the little boys that I could see ghosts. It was not a good idea. And he told the nun. And then I went to the Mother Superior's office, and my parents were called, and they were concerned that, there was something, I don't know if they thought I needed an exorcism or what. And my mother, who is amazing, or was amazing, she said to the nun, oh, don't worry. And this is all in Spanish because my parents didn't speak English. She said, little kids have imaginary friends. And so, oh, okay, it's imaginary friends. And I went home with my mother, and I distinctly remember sitting at the table with milk and cookies, and my mother saying to me, don't tell the Americans. And I said to her, why? She says, they won't understand. Don't tell the Americans. But if you need to tell someone, you tell your father, you tell me. And
Wow.
I had this little gold cross from Colombia, and I would always wear it in my shirt. And she said, you know how you wear your cross and you hide it inside? She says, it protects it. She says, that's what you have to do with this. Just pretend it's your cross and you have to hide it. And I hid it for a long time.
Wow.
Do you still talk to ghosts? Do you still hear them?
I still hear voices, and I have these like intuitive hits that my friends are like, if I were to tell you not to get on a plane, you really shouldn't get on a plane. It's that kind of thing. You should listen.
I mean, learning to hide as a young kid, oof, like, oh, I hear that and it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And I wonder, and I really wonder, how did that inform decisions you made? Like, what did you see that as a pain point in your existence that then grew in certain ways to a breaking point? Did something like that happen, or no?
No.
That's
What it did, it actually had because I'm a natural introvert, and I think so. If you're an extrovert and you're told to hide, that's really difficult. If you're an introvert, you go, okay, that's okay.
Like, cool. Sounds good.
Cool. I can be with myself. But no. So what it did is it made me that, and the fact that I was different, or I felt different. I always would say, they dropped me off on the wrong planet, and it made me an observer of life. And if you're a writer, being an observer is a really good thing, because I notice things that most people don't notice. And that started my writing. I was writing, the first thing I wrote that I can recall that I actually have in the journal was I was 10 years old and I wrote a poem. And I kept writing, it was like journal writing, but then I would write poetry, or I would write little short stories, or I would write plays for us as kids to play out. And I developed the skill of observation. And so the way I experience the world is markedly different than most people I know. And it's not just observation. It's I observe the world through multiple senses. Most people will say, oh, you're visual or you're auditory. Well, I'm all of them, and probably more kinesthetic than anything else. I'm the little kid that goes into a store and wants to touch everything, whose mother says, don't touch. So I think that's how it started. What I remember is feeling very much like an outsider for a very long time. It wasn't until I got to college that I felt, and in college, I was with kids who were from other countries. And I noticed, oh, they're like me, because my father always said, we are Colombian in the house and you're American outside the house. And so that's why we only spoke Spanish in the house. And so being in a different kind of community, in a more diverse community, made me think, oh, I'm just not different in the way I thought. And then I started understanding that in being different, there's a lot of advantages and benefits. And I didn't know that. And that's kind of what happened. So it wasn't that I actually shut down. I became a chameleon. I was really good at fitting into different places because I could observe and figure out, okay, I have to be this way. I have to say that. And then in business, it got really, it was really important for me to be able to adjust. One, I was Latina, and two, I was a woman in the business world. And, the same old story that you've heard 100 times. And so it was a skill, actually, that I developed. But at a certain point, it cost me. And it was about that time, about right around 2015, 2016, that I was feeling this sense of longing for something. I wanted to come home to myself, and I didn't know where home was.
Yeah.
Because I'd spent so much time trying to make something else my home, and I never felt comfortable in the United States. If I would travel, I always felt better when I was in Europe or South America or the Caribbean. And so that's what happened out of all of that. And then the trip to Ecuador in 2014, after I had experienced a great number of losses, is what, someone said, I can help you resolve this dilemma. And that was very compelling.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the dilemma was like, why do I still feel different? And I don't want to be different. I just want to be myself. And I have these things that happen to me, these intuitive hits, if you will. And it's great as a coach because I'm known for that. I'm known for asking what my clients call the radical question, the question that nobody else. But the reason I ask them, because I can hear it. I hear it in my head first. And or I'll see like a little movie in my mind and stuff. And it's just that kind of access that I have. And so I can ask a question that no one else has asked that person. And that's the question that breaks open whatever it is that's happening. So what started out as my seeing it as a disadvantage evolved eventually into my kind of accepting it. And now it's just completely fully integrated and unapologetic about it. And indeed, that's the thing that people come to me for. So it was like this whole, the circle that came back.
How ironic is that when the question that doesn't want to be said, like the thing that's hiding the elephant in the room, this is like, how do I want to word this question is how relieving is it to people to actually be asked the question that they are holding, that is the fearful point? Do you feel like it cracks open a space of connectivity, of empathy, of vulnerability? Like, how do your clients react when you pose these kind of questions?
The first way they react is somatically. This is what happens. Their shoulders drop. They drop like this. And they're dropping into themselves. That's the way I frame it. It's like a dropping into themselves in a way that feels safe, where it hasn't maybe felt safe before, because I'm holding that space as a witness. I'm not judging anything. I'm there to ask the question and be witness. And so that's the first response. And oftentimes they cry. So that might, and it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman, by the way. They will tear up and cry. And I just don't say a word. I just spend as much time holding that space as they need. I think silence is undervalued, and we're just not feel like you have to interrupt the silence all the time. People hate when it's a dead zone or quiet, and I'm just waiting for something to emerge that has nothing to do with me. So that's how I hold it.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. The power of the silence, the stillness. One of the things in your story, Alicia, that very much resonates with me is how you frame the conversation around romantic love and women. and how they, and again, saying broadly, but more this notion of losing one's power for love and belonging, potentially consciously, potentially unconsciously. But I know you have a lot to say around that, and how people who are experiencing that, how they might be able to either interrupt that pattern, or what they might be able to do to, I don't know, come back to themselves in a way that where they aren't losing themselves and giving away their power to this love, this sort of emptiness of need for love. And the reason I say it resonates with me is that's a large part of my healing journey, is around love relationships, romantic love, how I relate to men, that type of stuff. So yeah, what would you say to all that? The sponsor of today's episode is Great Spirit Farm. Yes. Love having Great Spirit Farm with us, and specifically their ayahuasca microdose tincture. It is a natural MAOI antidepressant and anti-anxiety. Great Spirit Farm describes the feeling as a warm hug. It can help you access deep creativity, flow, intuition, and improve vivid dream recall, which actually has totally been my experience.
So what is exactly in the bottle is the ayahuasca vine itself. So this is a tincture extraction, double extraction tincture that contains the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. Now, the particular vine that this has been extracted from has been growing in Florida now for over 25 years. And the ayahuasca vine does not contain DMT, so that makes this tincture 100% legal in all 50 states.
Yeah, Great Spirit Farm recommends starting with 1 to 3 dropperfuls and increasing your dose gradually from there until you feel the effects. There are no known contradictions with antidepressants, and always check with your doctor and only take as directed.
And what's really great about what Great Spirit Farm is doing is they're making sure that 10% of all the sales are returned to the Shipibo tribe, honoring the medicine's indigenous roots with active reciprocity. Now, if you want to try this tincture out for yourself, you can go to the website. That is ayadose.com, AYADOSE.com, and you can enter our discount code TTJ10 to get 10% off your order. Again, that's ayadose.com and all caps TTJ10 to get 10% off your order.
So I have this idea that we're not looking for love, we're looking for relief. And we're looking for relief from loneliness. And that's where it starts. We haven't actually done the work to fill ourselves up. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept, the shamanic concept called amor propio. But there's that sense of, I got to have a relationship, or I have to have a romance, but it's all out there. It's like all the focus is out there. And it's not really fair to another person either, because you're like dumping all of that on them, right? Like it's their responsibility to make you happy and love you back. And so I do believe in love, but not in the Disney version.
Yeah.
I don't think someone, the knight comes around and saves the damsel in distress kind of thing. That's such a lot of shit. But like, it's that awareness of not looking out, but looking in and saying, what part of me is not yet whole? What part of me needs to be healed? What part of me needs to belong to me? Belong to me first, right? And society isn't very helpful, because they want women to be paired. What's wrong with you? You don't have a guy. And I don't know if it's the same for men. I can't speak to that.
It is the same.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And so like, there's something wrong if you're like I have happy. Aren't you lonely? No. I actually like my own company. And I always tell people, it's not being by yourself, it's being with yourself. And so if I can be whole with myself, then I can be in a fulfilling relationship with someone, not out of need or the need to fill something in me or relieve a sense of loneliness. I can be there out of this kind of really kind of spiritual choice to be in a relationship and to be supporting that person in their growth and demanding that if you're in relationship with me, you have that the deal is you also support me in my growth. And that was a hard earned piece of wisdom. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and so you said, what can people do to interrupt it? In shamanism, at least in the way that I experienced it, there's this concept called amor propio, which translated is self-love, but I look at it as self-appreciation. And it's not the self-love that you read about. It's in the case of shamanism, what it says is that if you recognize that you have a divine spark, if you will, that you are part of the creator, that you have the same DNA as the universe, how could you not love yourself? Right? But that's an embodied experience. I can talk about that all the time, but the work is in the embodied experience. And that's pretty much what happened to me on that journey in Ecuador with the shaman. Was I can understand amor proprio, but until I had to go through that and really embody amor proprio and understand that every human being comes to this world. Napo used to say, nacimos inocente. We're all born innocent, right? And so you have that divine spark, and you recognize and you have gratitude for that soul that incarnates in the body and that becomes you. Then you will choose for yourself, and not in a way that hurts anyone else. You know, this idea of being selfish for some reason got translated as at the expense of, and it's not. Selfish just means self-care. That's all it means. So amor proprio is the core of that. So if someone is in a relationship, amor proprio has them choose themselves first, as opposed to whatever environment, whether it's toxic or abusive or just not right.
So Melanie and I are big advocates of this as a concept of putting one's self-care at the front of the line in order to be able to be fit to care for others, right?
Yeah.
That if we haven't first put our own oxygen mask on or our own life jacket on, then how are we possibly going to help anybody else? We're just going to drown or we'll all go down in the process. And this idea isn't in the foreground of Western culture. In Western culture, at least in the Christian Western culture that I grew up in, the idea that there's almost like a guilt that is placed on the individual if we're not, putting others first, in the sense that we should be self-sacrificing. And I've gone into deep conversations with friends I've known for decades around this idea of like, sometimes it's important to self-sacrifice, or maybe we should self-sacrifice. And I agree that there's a time where sacrificing our primary things in order to help a greater good or an individual or family or whatever, to sacrifice is really important. And it's a huge piece of all the ancient Gnostic teachings, right? Of sacrifice, of giving ourselves up. But without first doing the groundwork to be able to then return to ourselves afterwards, where I feel like the cycle becomes unending, that it just becomes a self-perpetuating loop of just sacrifice. And so what would you say to this idea of how do we interrupt this cycle? How do we take care of oneself first? And I'm asking you in reference to your own story, because you gave yourself up here. And now you've had to put yourself back in a place where you need to prioritize your own self-care. So take me down this journey, take us down the journey. How did that look for you? How do you speak to that?
First, I agree with you that there are times to sacrifice oneself. Like, if I have a baby,
Hell yeah.
that for me, that child is going to be number one. And if I have an aging parent or a sick friend, those are the times where sacrifice, and remember that sacrifice means to make sacred. All right. So you have to understand what the word actually means and how it's been misconstrued. So, I am making that relationship sacred by giving of myself. Right. So I think it's appropriate, but I don't think that it should be your modus operandi, what you call the loop. Right. What's interesting is, and especially for women, the culture says over and over to little girls, you're second and everybody else is first. Just remember that. And look at your mom, how she sacrifices for you. And the messages that girls get, it's just an abomination. And so part of that isn't just intellectual. It's also, I really think that everything is spiritual. So and that goes back to amor proprio, make sacred. I am a part of it. I have that divine spark in me. And so from that place, I can sacrifice for my child or my friend or my parents. What happens is oftentimes if you're not fully awake or conscious of it, you want to be a good person. There's nothing wrong with that. And you want to help others. But at a certain point, you cross your own boundary. And now it's at the expense of me. So if I want to support someone, the best way I can support someone is to be whole and not cross that boundary. Because at that boundary crossing, I'm giving up my agency. I'm now seeing it as something that I have no agency over. I have to do this. I have no choice, kind of thing. And a lot of times that happens, at least in my story, it happened, I would say, unconsciously. And I was coming off, and it was situational. I was coming off 7 years of loss upon loss upon loss upon loss. And I was sacrificing. I was taking care of my mother who had dementia, my husband who had lost his job, my son who was growing up, my business, my clients. And it was like, who's taking care of me? It was like all my energy was going out to taking care of everybody else. And I was tired. I was just really tired and sad and grieving. And I was like pushing that away. It's like, no, I got to keep going. Nope, can't feel that. Got to keep going. Right. And so,
I still relate.
Yeah. And you compartmentalize, right? So that you can do the thing that you have to do, right? That you feel like you have to survive. And then along comes this person who notices that I have this longing. And this longing has been with me my whole life. It's the longing to be able to merge the sacred and the secular. I've had this longing since 10, because I wrote about it when I was 10, just not in those words.
Wow.
But like, how do I merge the sacred and the secular in my life? And I had gone to all the workshops, and I had done the guru thing, and all that stuff, and had given up on it. And then I have these 7 years of terrible things happen to me. And then this person comes along and he says, I can help you resolve that longing. I can help you be greater than the grief you feel. And I was primed for that message. I was just, can I just rest here for a minute? I'm really tired. Can I just rest? And he was saying, yes, you can rest with me. And that's what happened. And I just surrendered. And I surrendered because I was just tired. But I also feel, in retrospect, that this was a relationship that was destined. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah, I want to hear.
Yeah. So when I was about in my 30s, like I've always had really vivid dreams. It's part of like the makeup of me. And there was one dream where I was climbing up a mountain and I had fallen, felt like I'd cut my knee. And I hear a noise and I hear like a banging, it was actually a stick on the ground, click, 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 like this. And I see this man coming up over the ridge. And I know it's a man. He's got this red poncho on with this big black cross on the back of it. He's got a fedora hat pulled down like here, so I can't see his face. And his staff, the very top of the staff, has a carved tiger on it. And he comes up to me, and I reach up my hand, like, can you help me up? And he hits my hand away with the staff and keeps walking. And then I wake up. But I never forgot that dream. I actually wrote it down because I write down all my dreams. Fast forward to 2016, 17, somewhere around there. I'm in Quito at Napo's apartment. It was earlier. It would have been earlier. It was 2014. It was late 2014. I met him in April 2014. It was October 2014. And I'm looking for something in the closet. And then this blanket falls out of the closet. It's a red blanket. And I pick it up and it's got a black cross on it. And I look up on the shelf and there's a black fedora hat. And his power animal was the tiger. And I just stood there in the room going, oh my God.
Wow.
I was like, it felt like, and this is actually a shamanic principle, it felt like a collapse of time. Time in that moment just collapsed from when I was 30 and had the dream to all of a sudden I'm in this apartment in Quito. It was like, I just saw this whole tunnel of time just collapse on me. And he found me in the room and I was holding up the poncho and he looked at me and I said, we've met before. And he goes, you're just figuring that out.
Oh,
It was like, okay. Do you want to say more about that?
wow.
Yeah.
And so had you already begun doing healing work with medicine, plant medicine, psychedelic medicine with this person?
No.
Or was that something that is coming for another purpose?
Well, in 2006, which is how I met him. I met his brother, Carlos.
Okay.
Carlos, a friend of mine married him. He was the brother. He was an Ecuadorian shaman. And I worked with him for about 6 years. And then at that point, Carlos and Megan, my friend, his wife, said, do you want to come to Ecuador with us? We need you to translate. Megan was doing a thesis or something like that on shamanism and trauma. And Napo, the older brother, was her mentor. And they needed an impartial person. Well, I have a counseling psychology degree. I'd been working with Carlos for 6 years. I knew about shamanism and I knew about spirituality. And I spoke Spanish fluently. So I went. And then when I arrived at the airport, this is the old Quito airport, which is like right in the middle of the city. You always thought you were going to crash land. It was awful. And it was. And baggage claim was they threw all the bags in a room and let you go at it. I'm not kidding you. That's the way it was. And so
A ceremony in itself.
and so then I saw this man standing on the other side, and I knew it was him. He had a what do you call it? New York Yankees
Yep.
hat on, and he had dark long hair, and I knew it was the brother. And I went up to him. It was like 1:00 in the morning by that time. And I hugged him. And the minute I hugged him, I felt this like electrical charge go up my spine. And I like literally pushed back because it was literally like somebody had plugged me into an electric socket. And he very calmly said, "Bienvenida a Ecuador. Welcome to Ecuador." And it wasn't until later in that week where he said, I knew you were different because I had this electric shock go up my spine. And he says, and I said to myself, I'm a shaman. That's not supposed to happen. And so that was the start of it. He never allowed me to do ayahuasca.
Wow.
He's and his brother, they they believe they are sixth generation shamans, and they believe that ayahuasca should only be used by shamans in ceremony. That is their belief system. And I remember at one point saying, if I were ever to do it, I would do it with you. And he said, I'm not going to do it with you. I said, you could have a heart murmur that I don't know about. Yeah, you could have something going on in your nervous system that I'm unaware of. And if I give you this, even under my supervision, says something could happen. And in Ecuador, where we live, many people died using ayahuasca. It was just covered over. Unless you live there, you didn't know about it. So I stayed away from the psychedelics. I think it's a choice that everybody makes, but I see a lot of people making very uninformed choices, and I think that's dangerous. And I also know that some people have had really life-changing experiences as a result. So it's an individual choice, but I chose, after talking to him, he's pretty much the only one I would have done it with.
It's interesting to hear the different lineages and approaches. I'm familiar with the lineage that teach that the shaman is the only one who ingests the plant medicine, and that they're the portal to the healing that's occurring, and that they transmit it as the healer to the devotees, to the those in need. And I've also been in the other side of the circle where I've participated as I am imbibing the plant medicine myself. And I have a lot of respect for these lineages. I feel very, very lucky to have worked with people who've been taught in the traditional ways through these lineage, and seen the differences between a lot of the modern Western approach and the traditional approaches. But I'm also a Western educated person and intelligent. So I've been able to navigate the world. And what am I going to say? I'm privileged. I'm a white man, right?
Yeah.
So how much more privilege do I get? I'm a Western white man, right? So I get to make my own choices and feel like I'm not threatened or at risk in those
Right.
choices, and where I'm going with this is, there's a time and a place for all of it, right? Like, sometimes what we really need is exactly what you were saying earlier, which is to be held, to be able to just surrender, and to have somebody else please do the work for me, because I have nothing to give right now. I can't step up to my own work at this time. I need a healer, a doctor, a shaman, someone to be a portal of healing for my vessel. And at other times, it's us who needs to step into our own self-care and say, I need to do this. I need to go to work on myself here, whether it's a emotional, physical, spiritual, it's all the same thing. It's all in one body being, right? So I guess where I'm taking this is, it's interesting to hear, in our culture, we mostly hear about people taking the plant medicine themselves. And so I'd be curious to hear more from your perspective about your journey, your value, what you gain from it, how did the healing work for you as receiving, as surrendering?
Yeah. So I think at the beginning, it felt just like that. It felt like I could rest and I would be taken care of, and I felt safe. And I wasn't just in a relationship with, but I kind of viewed him as a teacher as well. And he taught me a lot. And he taught me in unconventional ways, but it really worked for me. So we had gone out to the rainforest as an example, and we would go, he would, you get all dressed up. You have long sleeve, you have long pants, boots, because it's a dangerous place. And we would only go so far because I remember this one particular time, I hadn't taken malaria medicine yet. And so he goes, we can't go any further in because it'll be too dangerous if you get bitten by something. But he would use the plants to teach me. He would tell me I'll never forget this one teaching, which I just wrote about in a blog post recently. We were walking and he stopped and he said, "Look down and tell me what you see." And I looked down and it was like, in the rainforest, it was all dead leaves. It was like mushy and wet and dead leaves. And so that was my response. I said, "There's all this dead stuff. It's all dead leaves." He goes, "Yeah." He says, kneels down, he digs underneath. And there's these little dots underneath. And I'm looking at them and he goes, "Do you see this?" I said, "Yes." He says, "These are seeds." He said, "What you don't see, you only see the grief. You only see the sorrow. You only see the darkness. But if you look below the darkness, you will find that something has been planted and is reaching for the light." And that was like such a profound thing for me because, I see it in the world today. There's a lot of darkness, and that lesson kind of, when I feel almost hopeless or I doubt, I think about, okay, something has been planted that I can't see, and I have to believe that it's reaching for the light. And I, because of the nature of what I do for a living, for my work, for my whole purpose, I have to hold that. I have to believe that. Otherwise, I can't do my work. I can't have someone come to me and not say, "There's something here that's reaching for the light. We don't know what it is." And so those were the kinds of things that he taught me. And he taught me how to leverage what I already was doing. He said to me one time, if I had been born into his tribe, centuries ago, I would have been taken and apprenticed to a shaman. He says, "You have this innate ability." And the thing is, generations in my family have it. My mother used to tell me stories about her grandmother, and my father, he was absolutely a beautiful writer. And I didn't know that until after he died and I found his journals. But his poetry was shamanic in nature. Now that I have a distinction for it, I can say that. So that's just been the way I learned with him was experiential. And when I do retreats here, I've learned how to create not only activities, but practices that help someone get out of their head, because this is like a real barrier. And so for me,
that is the best sentence about that is a real barrier. Pointing at my head
after the fact, but not in the first part of it. And so I take them through these things, and I always say, "You got to trust me," Yeah, I take them do weird practices, and I have to just bypass the mind.
Yeah,
because I'm sure you work with the same kind of people, really intelligent, ambitious,
very smart, very experienced, lots
logical,
of skills, very strong in their skills, very type A. So there's a lot of.
You get a lot more type A than I do. No one goes skydiving with me, okay?
There's a lot of certainty in that, which is certainty. I say this often, where certainty can be very seductive because there's a sense that we are in control. There's a sense of perceptible, quote unquote, safety inside of a certainty, a declared certainty. And what I feel like I'm hearing in how you work with folks and what you gift them, is this experience of sort of getting through that wall, that hard barrier that is keeping them from that natural gift that you've now become very connected to in yourself of, I don't know how you would describe that, but flow or truth or intuition or divine spark, which is, God, what an experience that is, in my experience, to be connected to that flow, that divine spark, that, it's like the best feeling when you are fully surrendered. And again, I'm not suggesting it's an easy thing, because part of what I want to hear about also from you, Alicia, is about your breakdown, breakdown to break through, in the sense that you're in this relationship, you're learning this ancient wisdom, you are growing yourself, you're doing all these things that you're doing over the course of the relationship that you talk about in your book. And I really, whatever part of it or how you want to share about the breakdown to the breakthrough, or to like, what would you tell us about that? Like, what do you think people need to hear from you about that?
Well, it didn't really start until I moved full time to Ecuador. And first of all, he was older than I was, and there's still machismo in Latin America. So I think that had something to do with it. The third thing that had to do with it is he used to say shamans recycle energy, and sometimes it gets stuck. Like I remember him one time, he did a cleansing for a house in Virginia when he was with me here. He threw up for 4 days.
Wow.
And he told me, he knew. He told me in advance, he goes, this is going to be really hard. There's a lot of shit in here. And he threw up for 4 days. And I saw it. You know, I saw what he would go through physically when he was doing healing, and how he would have to go away and take care of himself. And then when we were in Ecuador, we ran retreats, but it wasn't like group retreats. It was people would find us and come for healing. And my skills complemented his skills. And we kind of had a little bit of a crossover, but, you know, kind of both stayed in our lane, if you will. And people would come for a week, up to even a month, and they would live with us. And it was like, it wasn't your traditional kind of thing. It was our presence. And we would put them to work and do things that were like, we kind of like wanted them to break away from whatever was keeping them contracted. And it worked. And we worked really well together. The thing is that we built this retreat center in Salongo, which I'm still trying to sell. It's beautiful, but it took a toll. You know, if you build in really like a developing country, people don't show up. They use shoddy materials. They lie. They cheat. All of that was happening to us. We were outsiders in this little community, no matter how much we tried to integrate and how much we tried to give back. And he kind of took the brunt of that, mostly because he's the guy. He's the man. But then that brunt came to me. And so he started really getting dark. And we started having arguments. And it was this paradox, which is really strange. You know, here you have this spiritual being doing shit, stuff that I don't agree with, and ultimately being abusive. And how do you reconcile these two sides? And what I would say is, he was a powerful shaman. He was a very flawed human being. And that's what started happening. And then it started getting worse and worse. And I just couldn't figure out a way out, because I'm the one who paid for it. I invested so much of my energy and my life, my financial life into this. And I realized after I left, because I did have like a complete breakdown after I left, when I realized it wasn't the relationship that I lost. It was the dream. It was the dream that I had, this dream to with him to provide this healing center where people could come and be healed. And it was a big dream. And when I separated from him in 2019, you know, a couple of months afterwards, where I was living in a friend's guest house. And I just had this realization that, wait a minute, this is what really happened. And I was like on the floor for 3 days, completely lost it. My friend would come over and try to
Understandable.
feed me.
Understandable. Totally normal. So like, easy to validate. I mean, heartbreak is so universal. And
I was destroyed. I was so destroyed.
God, been there. You are not alone.
Yeah.
At all.
So, and so it was that he just became really dark. He started drinking. He started getting violent. Started locking my bedroom door to keep him away, all that stuff. And I remember I used to do coaching for women with domestic violence. And I remember sitting there going, no, 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 this cannot be happening to me. This does not happen to me. I'm the one who takes care of people. This cannot be happening. And I couldn't tell anyone except that one person in my life knew. And she was always there for me. And she said, if I call you and you don't answer me and you don't get back to me within a week, I'm sending someone after you.
Good.
So what was really interesting about that is right before I left him, I went home for Christmas and I went to Boston, where my sister lives. And I went to Annapolis, Maryland, where my son lives. And when I went to Boston, some of my old friends showed up. And I remember having dinner and they were telling stories about us, like when we were in college or when we did that or when we went snowboarding or whatever. And all of a sudden, like I start remembering who I am. I was so gaslighted that I basically didn't know who I was anymore. I mean, gaslighting is a terrible, terrible thing that narcissists, and he was a narcissist, do. And when I started remembering, and then I went to Annapolis and met some more friends and saw my son. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, who I am will stop this. And so I went back and I pretty much was there for a week and left him after that.
Powerful. Like your power surged back.
It did, but
knowing
in community. And this is one of the things that he was keeping. That's why he isolated me, to keep me away from that community, because he knew that if I plugged into the community, I would recover my strength. And so going back to a question you asked previously about what happens, what can you do when you're in this situation? You got to tell your friends. You got to lean on your community, people that you know that love you and can support you. And that's one of the things that happens is, women are isolated by their abusers. Yep. And you feel a lot of shame, right? Because like, this doesn't happen to me. I'm so-and-so, and then that shame keeps you from speaking out. But, silence is our enemy. Silence is what keeps people abusing other people. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book. And I got to tell you, it took everything I had to write that book. And it was a healing process unto itself. But one of the reasons I did it was because of what I learned about being silent. I serialized the book first to my newsletter. And I was so surprised. I started sending out one chapter every Saturday. The messages I got from women, I never told anyone but. Yep. You've given me the courage to do X. And these were people both that I knew and didn't know. And I didn't know that about them, the people I knew. And it's like one of the things about writing memoir is you give others permission to tell their story.
Yes.
And that counters the silence. And
100%.
I kind of knew that intuitively, but like not until I started getting these messages. And it made me want to write the best possible book, not out of resentment, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of a place where I had settled into healing and peace within myself so that I could then share this story without any acrimony.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do believe I was able to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I feel similarly. I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm also a writer. I wrote a monthly column for about 11 years, and it turned into a book that I published. And some of the writing that I had to do to sort of complete that anthology, one of them was a piece that I wrote about my own Me Too experience and really calling out the women that helped me get to the point exactly what you are describing as like I needed to see Rachel Den Hollander on the Netflix Athlete A documentary, really owning her story, being really strongly, beautifully, bravely in her voice, and be able to go, oh, that's why I'm going to sit down, my butt in the seat, and really work on these words, because I'm ready. I know I'm ready. I just wasn't doing the work to put it on paper. And same. So many people have reached out with gratitude and like support around that. And I feel like that when I talk about impact, when I talk about healing, art as healing, I feel like I really resonate with you as that like healing experience in the creative like process and the creative sharing and bravely being seen for what that story was, and giving permission to others who might feel like, oh, I didn't realize I could even say anything
Yeah.
until I saw that.
Yeah.
So I love that impact that you're doing, Alicia. It's amazing.
Yeah, this is the first book that I've written that's memoir. I have 2 other books previous that are personal development. And I think it's good that I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
Right.
But there was 2 chapters that I kept avoiding. And I actually wrote around them.
Yeah.
And then
I get it.
yeah. And then I realized I have a friend who runs this amazing retreat center outside of Lisbon in the middle of the Alentejo. And she had said to me, if you ever need a place to go. And I called her up. I said, remember when you said that? I said,
Did you mean it?
I have these 2 chapters and I need someone to take care of me. I said, because I'm going to be a mess, and can I bring my dog? And she's like,
nice.
Yeah, come up here. And so I wrote the 2 chapters. I mean, it's a retreat center, so it was beautiful food. She had horses. I hung out with the horses. I did the labyrinth walk, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And then when I finished it took me 4 days. I was going to leave on the 3rd day, and she wouldn't let me. She says, it's not done yet. You have to stay. She wouldn't let me leave. And then on the 4th day, I called her. I said, I'm done. Can I read this to you? I need a witness. And she came to my room, and I said, I am not going to be able to make it all the way through this, but I have to read it out loud. And she just held space for me. And I read it, cried, and she just held space for me. And it was one of the most powerful things about writing that book, to have someone who is a very spiritual being herself, well, very shamanic in many ways, to be able to witness this event for me, was really, I have deep appreciation for her for that, and she knows that.
That whole deep human need to be seen, right? It's so right at the bottom of our heart. It's right down at the point, is this in the base. It's like where the water drips down to the very bottom crevice, is that deep need to be seen. And it's universal amongst all of us, that we all have this deep desire to be seen for who we truly are, and for the experiences that we've had, the positives, the negatives, the pain, the struggle, the joy, all of it, right? And those moments where both sides, where we get to see ourselves by telling our own story and being witnessed in the telling of our story, we're able to be the objective observer to our own experience and re-feel our own emotional journey empathetically as the outsider through the person who's witnessing us, right? Like that process is such a powerful thing. And I listening to your story there, it just brought me back to so many different points in my life where I've wanted to be really heard, seen, felt, understood, felt related to, felt connected, felt loved, felt held, all those things. And yeah, go.
I think we see each other through the eyes of others, like what happened to me at dinner when I was in Boston. I think, we have, you guys coach. So I always tell you, you can reflect back to people their weakness, or you can reflect back to people their courage, and they will see what you reflect back. So that was like why I was reminded of who I was, because in storytelling that night at dinner, they were telling me stories that reflected back to me my own strength and my own joy and my own happiness. And I said, I want that. I can get it. I kind of realized, wait a minute, all this, I can. And there's a cost to it, but it's worth it. And that kind of being seen and witnessed in that way, and then having that reflected back, is really powerful.
So powerful. Alicia, we could clearly go on for a long, long time, and a really great, wonderful, deep dive conversation. I'm loving every minute of this. What have we not touched on that you want to make sure we cover before we close today?
I think, the idea of amor proprio is really important today. People think that they're going to go out and solve all these big problems. They shouldn't. They should like work on themselves. If each one of us recognized our own sense of divinity, and if each one of us did our own work, it's the pebble in the pond, right, that ripples out. We can't do a lot of the big stuff on our own, but I believe in the power of one. And I believe that the power of one starts with amor proprio, with healing ourselves first.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alicia. I really value your perspective and your willingness to share your journey and in your writings and today here on the podcast. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I have started reading the book. I haven't finished it, but I am really looking forward to finishing it. And for those of you watching the YouTube, here is the book, The Shaman's Wife. And we'll put all the links in the show notes. How can people connect with you? How can they find you?
The best way is through my website. It's www.alicia, ALICIAM, Rodriguez with the Z.com. So AliciaMRodriguez.com.
Beautiful.
That's the best way.
All right. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.